Okay, thanks everyone. I beg your pardon while I have a little setup. I like props, and I gathered from the comments I got in the bar last night that you like props also, so we're going to have props. There we go. And the reason I rewrite my presentation the night before is because Dennis tells me I need to the day before, so. All right. Okay, so this isn't much of a prop, but I'm going to wear some headphones. And we're going to get some stuff set up here. All right, so making the new machine, what is that about? What is a machine? We have some ideas. This isn't a rhetorical question you have to answer. You're not getting off the hook. Everybody in this room knows what a machine is. Christina, what is a machine?
It's something that can turn something else to mechanically.
Okay, something can turn something else mechanically. Anybody else?
A tool, a guide.
A tool, a guide. Okay, come on. There's 300 of you in here. Yes, sir.
Something that does work.
Something that does work. That's a very good definition. That's kind of one of the basic definitions. So we do have really basic machines. You know, in the past, simple machines were things like wedges and pulleys, you know, that we wouldn't really think of as a machine today, but this was sort of the origin of the term. But today we tend to think of things that have, you know, some gears and components and do some work and things like that. We also talk about computers as machines. We talk about machine learning and machine vision. We talk about molecular machines like nanotechnology, even though they don't actually exist. So there's that. There are future machines. If this is the pace, I have no idea what the next future machines are going to be like. But then there's my favorite machine, and I think everybody else's favorite machine, which is the all-of-the-above machine, the time machine. Okay, so this is the time machine from the movie Back to the Future. It was the biggest movie of 1985. Michael J. Fox, a much younger man at the time, starred as Marty McFly, and he went back and forth in the past, to the future, to the very distant past, solving problems and having adventures. So, to start out, welcome to the machine. Let's rewind. Now, I say let's rewind. When was the last time you actually rewound anything? Do you even know what that is? If you're under 30, you might not. So you've probably heard, this is a little bit of old news, but the music industry is really hurting. So there's a new disruptive format. It's killing sales. New artists are using this format to reach audiences directly, not having to go through the onerous and time-consuming paths that the industry would make them go through. They have a lot of reasons for this. The consumers, that they think it's killing sales. Consumers can also copy music and share it freely without having to pay for it. This enrages the industry. And it's having a material impact. So in the 6 years, sales have gone from about 15 billion to 9 billion, and that's just in the US. Okay. So I said this was old news, but I meant it's really old news because this is the cassette tape era. So 1975 to 1985 was a bad time for the music industry, and a lot of the same types of arguments that they're making today were almost verbatim the arguments they made at the time. Home taping is killing music, and it's illegal. Neither of those things are true. But this little device had a huge impact on the industry. So I'm going to set this up so you can hear a little bit of the music at the time. It is meaningful. The things I do for you people. Props, props, props. Okay, and some, let's see here. All right, so, close. All right, we got, one more thing, of course. There's a lot of business going on up here. Like I said, props are fun, but they take time. I hope this will be worth it. Okay. So, Don, guys in the back, tell me when that's ready. It'll take a sec. You can flip back in the meantime. Just go back to the presentation. So, you can go to the main, thank you. All right, so we'll get the music demo going in a second. So why did cassettes beat vinyl? Well, there are two big reasons. Artists hated the music industry. So do we have our music demo going yet? Pink Floyd wrote this song, Welcome to the Machine, the title of this section. And these are some of the words. You bought a guitar to punish your ma. You didn't like school. You're nobody's fool. So, artists, a lot of people got into rock and roll because they were rebels. And there they were, having to basically deal with contracts and all kinds of other issues that they didn't really get into it for. So artists got something out of cassettes. They got a way to bypass this whole machine. Material suppliers also had a huge business opportunity. How are we doing? Not so good. All right. So material suppliers saw a huge business opportunity, too. They could sell billions of cassettes annually. So not only the pre-recorded ones, which were replacing vinyl, but that would be it. There we go. Thank you. Power, always good. But they were selling blank cassettes, too. And so, again, this was the blank cassettes outsold the pre-recorded cassettes by a pretty wide margin over time. So this is a really big business for them. But like I said, times were not good, and the consumer impact was the one that the industry focused on. So why did cassettes beat vinyl? Well, they gave things to the consumers that the industry wouldn't. I've just got some liner notes here to kind of illustrate what cassette tapes meant to the consumers. So this is a list of songs on somebody's cassettes. At first, we've got a song by Queensryche, followed by one by Billy Joel. And I'm pretty sure that nobody in the music industry ever thought that that compilation needed to be put together and sent into stores. So, but for whoever this was really meaningful. They've also got Cutting Crew on there and some other people that don't really belong in the same list. So yeah, they were cheaper, but they weren't free. Free was not the point. Free was, I can't get what I want. I don't want to listen to an entire album full of filler. I will make the playlist that I want. That shouldn't be illegal, and it's not. They also were an expression of love, of friendship, of creativity. So these liner notes, I'm sorry you can't read all these. Felix, the past few weeks have been great with you. Have a great remainder of the summer. Don't have too much fun without me, and don't let anyone else slap you around. Take it easy. Love, DZIM. So these were ways that people expressed themselves with one another and communicated. So, free, again, was not the point. This isn't a way to be creative. Do we have songs at this point? Can we switch over? All right, so I'm just going to pull up the Pink Floyd song of the time. Note that I'm not using a tape because that would be too hard. And I can't read this. You guys are going to be like, this better be worth it, Mark.
That's your computer?
Well, this is the... I can't even read this stuff. Computers are terrible. We should not have computers. Here we go. The machine. All right. So this was basically what the industry sounded like to the artists of the time. And I'm going to go. There we go. So this is how happy they were. Sad song. It was almost a funereal march. And let's go back to the regular presentation. And the point was, these were not happy times. The same things that were happening in back then are happening today. But let's look at why and what for. So this dashing young man, who happens to be speaking with you right now, is looking at his father's stereo equipment at the time. You'll see a phonograph and a reel-to-reel tape player. Now, these, and you can totally cut the music, or do I need to do that? So, this was not easy equipment to use. If you look at the instrumentation here, it's like something you'd find in a nuclear power plant or maybe a submarine. You've got buttons and switches and sliders. You've got very, very delicate instruments that have to be placed in exactly the right place, or you ruin the medium, you scratch the record, or you cut the tape. So only very, very precocious children were capable of using this equipment at the time, which is why mine was about a good head's reach out of reach. In later pictures, there was a lock on the door. So this was not something that was very accessible, but a cassette tape, on the other hand, was super accessible. Any child literally could use this. And kids today, just you take it and you drop it in. It's not a problem. Okay, so this technology greatly simplified the interface. The user experience changed in a dramatic way. That, more than the cheapness, more than the formatting, more than anything else, really made this a breakthrough product. So not only did it change the way we used it for music, we listened to music at home on our stereos, but it also changed the way that we listen to music at all. Like, you couldn't do this with a reel-to-reel or a phonograph. You couldn't go for a stroll on your skates. You couldn't take it in your car with you. There was 8-track, but that wasn't a really good format. You were still really tied to whatever the record company decided to give you. And you could even do things like, Apple Computer here, distributing software on this medium. So it was really, really versatile, and this was what really changed the market, is it was such a versatile format that you could use it for a lot of other things. So that, like I said, is the sum here. The thing to take away from what happened in the music industry is that by combining several functions into one, making the old ones obsolete, the cassette replaced a lot of existing equipment and media. And it did things in a way that remixed industry roles. It let other people come in. So you had a change-resistant industry. They don't want to do it. Get a new format that comes in that lets outsiders, lots and lots of outsiders, come in and change how that industry evolves. So we're going to see that pattern again and again and again, and that's really the takeaway for today. So again and again and again is in the music industry. So that was the 70s and 80s, the compact cassette. Well, then the compact disc came along and changed the picture. Now, this looks like a huge rise in sales, right? And it was. But on top of this, there were the recordable discs that came out a little bit after the non-recordable ones that were much, much, much greater in sales, of course. Then in around the 2000-2005 timeframe, we had the MP3 format, which made it even simpler to use. Despite what I just showed you, that was not so simple. But that really turned around the fortunes for the music industry, and maybe for good. So as you see, that decline around 2005 with MP3 and the event of companies like Napster, that started a decline in sales that we really haven't recovered from. MP3s and Apple basically tried to help out with downloading. They made a lot of money and still make a lot of money on downloading. But as you see, that never really turned the curve around. Apple's making a lot of money from that, but even downloading has now started to be disrupted by a new format, and that's streaming. So Spotify, Pandora, these services are actually taking away even that little market that existed. So it's a race to the bottom. Now, at the same time, there's been huge amounts of money made. It's not like the music industry went away or this recording medium wasn't somehow tied to the sales of music. But basically the value captured by others that could have belonged to the music industry, they basically said, we're not willing to change our business model, we're not willing to change our structures, and so we'll just let other people have that money while we go into decline. Now, I showed you a cassette tape. This is that cassette tape. I'm going to come back to that. It's not actually a cassette tape, which you might have actually guessed, which is why it was so hard to use. So you might be saying, no, Mark, none of us are in the music industry. Hate to tell you that. Well, let me tell you, it might be. So with an analogy here, what cassettes were to vinyl and reel-to-reel tape, shipping containers are almost exactly the same thing in logistics and moving materials around. So before we had multimodal shipping containers, you had crates, big wooden crates that strong men in busy ports would load and unload manually from ships onto trucks, trucks onto trains, trains back onto trucks, and then somewhere they'd end up in the store, they'd be cracked open. This is an incredibly manual, labor-intensive job. And by putting all of that complexity from the crates to the vehicles to the workers and even tracking the things into basically one device, kind of like a cassette, it even looks like, it completely transformed not only the industry, the way we get things around, but it transformed global trade. So it was assumed that this might lower the cost of shipping and logistics. But what it meant, in fact, was that completely new countries would start to make things that they hadn't made in the past because they could easily be shipped all over the world. So this one technology, for exactly the same reasons and almost in exactly the same shape, changed all kinds of other industries that are not the music industry, but for the same reasons. So if you look at this model, new interface makes things obsolete, you've got a checklist, change-resistant industry, hardware-software interface, and opening up access to industry outsiders. We see that with music, we see that with multimodal containers, we see it with desktop computers, which is what I'm going to be getting to. So this is actually a picture I took from the back of the room earlier this morning when Chris Hartshorn was talking. You might think that you're not in the music industry, you're in chemicals or cars or food or something else, but you are actually very much in the music industry and very much in the same predicament. So, welcome to the machine. The soul of a new machine, a decidedly more upbeat section. In 1981, a book came out, The Soul of a New Machine. Have a copy right here if you want to read it later tonight. And this book was transformative, not because it was about computers. There had been books about computers before, but this book was transformative because it told the story of this team racing to develop this machine you see over here, the Data General Eclipse MV8000. Now, this is a $250,000, quote-unquote, mini computer. You'll note it does have a reel-to-reel tape drive. And it was sort of the last gasp of hope for Data General. Data General had been in decline for a while. They needed something to save their business. And in fact, this machine did turn it around. By 1984, they were making billions of dollars. So it was a big turnaround. But the story was about the human dynamic and the human drama of the team doing this. And it was really the first time that this became kind of like a rock band. It kind of became a pop icon thing. So if you read one of the quotes here, from Wired Online, Evan Ratliff writing in O Engineers, the soul of a new machine made circuit boards seem cool and established a revolutionary notion that there's art in the quest for the next big thing. So music is a machine, but computers are art. Now, Data General, you might notice, is not one of the suppliers of any of the computers any of us are using here today. At the same time that this book came out and all this hope was happening, Xerox came out with a different type of machine. Now, this was still a very large computer. It's about a $50,000 machine, not a $250,000 machine. But it had one thing that was really, really different, and that was this, the graphical user interface. So again, this is 1981. This is an interface that came out of Palo Alto Research Center, Xeroxparc. And I just want to point out some things that I'm sure you'll have no trouble recognizing. There's a clock. There's an inbox and an outbox. I kind of wish they had skipped that, right? Like if you go back in time and go, don't do the email. No, bad idea. But they did it. Calendar, calculator, folders that look like folders, PCs that look like PCs, wastebasket that looks like wastebasket. This is exactly the same interface that we use today. It's a little, more color and higher resolution, but pretty much nothing's changed with this interface in the last 30 years. And Xerox had a new approach to this because Xerox didn't make computers. Xerox made office equipment. They made typewriters and they made copiers. And so when they made a computer, they made it do the things that typewriters and copiers did. And the people that used typewriters and copiers were not lab coat scientists walking around big machines that, word and calculated things and did stuff that normal people didn't need to do. So again, same pattern here. We've got this complexity all getting sucked up into one interface. Typewriter, mail, copiers, file folders, calculators, all these devices now are in one place. And they are so simple any child can operate it. I literally got to use this because my dad worked at Xerox. And the other thing that's actually not suitable for precocious children, those old technologies just went away. So within 10 years, Data General is gone. So you're seeing this pattern. And now that we've seen the pattern, I want to show how it's actually going to turn around. So we've actually reached the limits of this photorealism. There's a term, skeuomorphism, which is the desire to design things so that they have this photorealistic look, which you see like on the bookshelf interface for the iPad. So this interface is actually so realistic that its utility is starting to decline. It's peaked and is going down. You can't read the covers on the books. You don't know what those books are unless you've seen the book in a bookshelf, which is gone because nobody buys books in bookstores anymore. So how do you know what those books are? You have to get up really close like this, right? And even then you can't see. Right, so they have wood grain paneling. Who cares? Wood grain paneling, maybe you don't like it in your house. Why would you want it on your computer? They even make book sounds. When was the last time you weren't sure you were reading a book because it wasn't making enough sound? Right? So it's gone past the point of making any sense. It's ridiculous, and I have just one more example because this one started to make my head spin. So, did you see the movie Frozen? Elsa, the princess. Well, so she's a virtual character. She doesn't exist in real life. I think we all know that. But there's The Sims. Now, The Sims is a virtual world where you can create your own characters and your own house and live in that world. And that's kind of fun. Some people just like making characters. So they have little competitions in The Sims to make characters from outside The Sims, including this one that's virtual. So you have a virtual character in a virtual world that's being made by virtual characters into, I don't know what, but it's just too crazy. So at this point, we have reached the point where we don't need any more realism. More realism will not make computers any more effective. It's actually starting to damage their value. So for the past 30 years, we have done everything to make computers look and act more like the real world. We'd say cut, copy, and paste. When was the last time you used paste? Anybody paste anything today, like with real paste? No. But we're more familiar with computers than we are with the things that they represent. So we are at a turning point, and that turning point is this. For the past 30 years, we've tried to make computers work like the real world. For the next 30 years, we'll try and make the real world work like computers. So this is why this is so important for you, because this is what we're going to be doing now. Now, you might think 30 years, that's too far. I have a 5-year planning horizon. It's not like the computer industry waited 30 years and then everything happened. The whole time, stuff's been going on, and it's been a wild ride every minute. So don't think that you've got a lot of time to spend, waiting around and thinking about this. So just some examples, and these are investments that are already being made in the billions of dollars. SaaS stands for Software as a Service, and that's basically the reason that you don't have to go buy disks of, say, Salesforce.com and put them in your floppy drive and load it onto your computer. You use the internet, you use their servers, and as a service, you sort of subscribe to that application. Okay, so we know that from the computer world. Well, now we see Uber, cars as a service, streaming is music as a service. CPG, my colleague Gigi Wang is talking about the Dollar Shave Club, which is shaving as a service. You subscribe to shaving. So those things are turning into basically a view of packages as packets. When you send an email somewhere, or you upload a file, you don't think about how it gets there. But we do have to think a lot about packages. Well, when packages move like packets, they'll basically, Uber, Amazon, somebody will send an autonomous delivery vehicle to pick things up. They'll go wherever it's going, and you won't have to think about all the logistics and mechanics of that going on. The Internet of Things is kind of a big term. A lot of people investing a lot of money there. Monsanto has put $1 billion into Climate Corp, which is a company that basically looks at what are the factors going into the weather-related factors and climate-related factors going into food production and turning that into data as a service. So that's a very different approach from the biotechnology that they've spent all the last 20 or 30 years developing. And then there's this concept of cloud manufacturing. So cloud computing is basically like, again, where you use Amazon Web Services, you use somebody else's physical resources and sometimes software resources, and again, you just subscribe to them and use them as you need them. Factories, though, we think of something as we own. It's a physical place you go. You have people that report to you that use those machines. Well, cloud manufacturing is a new way of looking at manufacturing where you don't have to think about all that. You just take your design, you put it into an interface that then spreads that out over all the manufacturing infrastructure you need, and your products come out the other end. So it basically virtualizes the entire process of manufacturing. So these are conceptual, but again, in GE's case here, they've put $3 billion into their industrial internet. They have a platform called Predix that you can attach any type of industrial equipment to, not just GE's. So if you have a Siemens manufacturing equipment, you can put that into their platform. Of course, that's very good for them because they're going to get that data. So there's a lot of big opportunities out there. And let me, again, just emphasize, this can happen to anything. So we think of Uber kind of disrupting the taxi industry. Taxi industry is kind of like the music industry. It's corrupt. It's too old. It's not willing to change. One application comes along and changes that for exactly the same reasons in exactly the same way. Because that application is a virtual example of a container. You don't have to have a physical container. The application basically puts a box around the driver, the payment, the map, and everything else, and just says, you've got this simple interface, and now you've got the biggest taxi fleet in the world. So you don't have to go out and hire people, buy cars, set up maintenance shops. All that stuff is virtualized. And if you need a ride, that's also pretty easy. So that can happen to any device in an oil field, in a factory, on a ship. Anything that can get tagged and attached to the internet, in that Internet of Things, can get Uberized. So some examples here. What are those things? What are those attachment points besides smartphones? You're not going to put a smartphone on your industrial robot, probably, but you might put something like this. So on the hardware side, we've gone from PCs to smartphones to simple devices like the Raspberry Pi and Arduino. Now, these are really simple microcontrollers. They're very cheap, and that was actually the point. This is actually a Raspberry Pi in this cassette tape case. So this is a full-fledged desktop computer you saw running. I can do more with it than just play MP3s. They're small and cheap. They're $20. Okay? They don't take a lot of effort to, well, they do take a lot of effort if you're trying to do anything fancy like run an MP3 on it. But the point is, this is a really cheap way to get into microcontrollers and attaching things to the Internet of Things. Input devices, too. So we've gone from the mouse and those types of sensors to touchscreens, another way to interact. Now we see a proliferation of things like vision sensors and audio sensors. So this is a box from a company called Cubic Robotics. It's a Russian company that I visited last year in Moscow. And you just talk to Cubic. You say, Cubic, what's for breakfast at such and such a restaurant tonight? Or can you book a table for me? All that virtual interaction, you just speak to their box or to your smartphone, and it takes that and puts that into instructions. On output, so we think about output, now it's going to be physical. What's that like? We talk a lot about 3D printing. Everybody's pretty familiar with that. But there's a company called Proto that is a very new company that I want to show you that's actually printing complete electronic devices. So if you can print a complete electronic device, you can basically start to look at design cycles for material things, even electronic things, like design cycles for software. Now, everything evolves pretty much in the same way. You start out with a thing that has some mutation, some change. Those changes are then selected for, in some cases. The good ones you get to keep, and the bad ones you throw out. The ones that you keep, you generally reproduce and distribute somewhere so they spread around. Then they're in different environments, and again, you have some changes that help them adapt to those local environments, and the cycle repeats. Now, in software, this can take days. Agile software development, you do this basically once a day. You wouldn't think about doing that, say, in automotive or in consumer electronics. But with Proto, you're essentially doing that. So this is some example of their screen. They have a CAD system where you design a product. In this case, it's a little plastic triangle with a smiley face on it. And the idea is that you attach that to your bag or your baby stroller so that if it moves suddenly, somebody tries to take off with it, there's an accelerometer, it senses that, and it lets out a really loud noise. It screams. So those modules, accelerometer, logic board, and so on, you add on in the CAD system, you write the code in the CAD system, and it prints it. It prints all the conduits between the modules. If it can't print the modules, it puts a little space that's sort of shaped like a tiny little cassette space that you just click it in, and all the things, all the connectors are set up right there so that module you click in is ready to go. So your design cycles are now from days to maybe even just hours. You can print these things out, look at it, does it work, go back, redesign, and print it out again. So products can evolve just as fast as software, even though they're material-based. The question is, can companies do that too? So just taking a little bit of a flashback to LES companies in the past, we like to highlight companies as well as props. In 2013, we introduced you all to a company called Local Motors. So Local Motors is a car company, startup car company, not a lot of those out there in the world. They've gone from idea to product in 18 months with about $3 million, which is unheard of in the automotive industry. So they got a lot of attention just because of that, that progress that they were making. And if you saw the Transformers movie last summer, first of all, I'm sorry, because it's a terrible movie, but you might have seen the bad guy cars, these evil, black-looking, awesome cars. That was their cars. So these cars, they're great, and they are already certainly on the road. Well, where Local Motors is today, last September, Local Motors and Oak Ridge National Laboratories were at a manufacturing conference in Chicago, and they printed a car on stage. They developed a very, very big 3D printer, and they printed out the whole, the body and the structure. They put on the parts that you can't print, things like powertrain and stuff like that, and drove it off all at the conference. And I was at their place in May, and they didn't know exactly which design they were going to be printing. So it's not like they've been practicing for a year or two to get it right and then do it on stage. They were, they're moving fast. So yeah, material companies can move very, very fast, and maybe as fast as product companies, or as software companies. We also talked about the Pebble smartwatch in 2013. I still have mine on. Pebble at the time was not only the first smartwatch, but had been the biggest Kickstarter campaign in the history of Kickstarter. And you'll note that they beat Samsung to market by about a year. They beat Apple to market by 2 years. In fact, Apple, just before they launched their smartwatch a week or so ago, Pebble launched their newest product, which is called the Pebble Time. And I'm noting this for two reasons. One, the user interface is really different. We are still kind of stuck in the desktop metaphor with a lot of our apps. They thought, well, does that really make sense as a user interface for a watch? How about time itself? So their interface is actually time. You go backwards and forwards in time, and that's how you navigate through the watch and its functions. They're also on a Kickstarter campaign for this, and as of last night when I checked, they'd raised about $19 million. They have about 10 days to go. So they are now, once again, the biggest Kickstarter campaign in history. But most importantly, if you compare that to all the sales of smartwatches for last year, it was about $100 million, $20 million, so 20% basically of last year's total sales figure they got in roughly a month and a half, and they haven't sold anything. I mean, they don't actually have a product to sell. So they're doing pretty well. Biology. So biotech is notoriously not amenable to things going fast. Again, in the past, we talked about glowfish, 2012, little aquarium fish that you can get that fluorescently glow, and then glowing plant last year, which is a plant that basically can do the same thing. These are organisms that have been engineered to use proteins that they don't normally have so that they can glow. And I'm fidgeting with props while we talk, so you won't have to wait so much later. So where they are today is that glowing plant has developed what they call a platform for plants for doing lots of other types of products. They've also gotten some competition from companies like BioGlow, also doing glowing plants, and RevBio, which is making plants that change colors. So I don't know what's going to happen next in the biotech area, but I know that things are going to continue to happen, and they're going to continue to evolve a lot like we think of software startups. Now, the question is, if software startups and material startups can evolve just as quickly, can material companies and industries that are bigger than that also move ahead fast? And exactly how might that happen? So the whole reason you're here probably is because you have a theory that we would share that happens by looking at future innovations and seeing who's working on them now. So going back to our time machine, it just so happens that in the Back to the Future movies, the time machine came to this year, 2015, October 21st, 2015, so we're a few months early, but there were a lot of innovations in the movie Back to the Future 2, I believe, that we might look around and say, hey, is there someplace I might actually partner with a company that's doing that, or maybe license something from them, or collaborate with them in some way. So one of the inventions was a fruit dispensing emotion sensing smart kitchen. You had to say, may I please have a piece of fruit? You had to say it very nicely, and then you would get a piece of fruit. So that could be kind of cool for a smart home. Robotic gas stations, you didn't need to get out of your car to put in whatever fusion fuel they were using in the movie. Or the hoverboard, probably one of the more iconic technologies of the future. And you can barely see that it zips by here, but this is actually supposedly made by Mattel. And we actually have Olga Patel from Mattel here. Is Olga around? So Olga, do we have a hoverboard yet? We don't. You don't? Oh, darn it. Okay. So that's why that would be a bad prop to have up here.
We have 6 more months.
6 more months. All right, that's true. Okay, so do we have the elements of these technologies somewhere around? Can we look around and find them? As Dennis said, I like to look for things like that. Starting with the fruit. Now, I didn't find any fruit dispensers, but I did find an intelligent office. And as you probably know, we have a service called Intelligent Buildings that my colleagues Alex Herzeg and Aditya Ranade are running. So there's a company called Core Service Management based in Europe, and they have a system, an interface, if you will, for offices. Where they put sensors around things like dust, the trash bins, the copiers, the kitchens, even just the seating areas in the conference rooms to see how often those things are occupied. And so what they get is a very rich, real-time picture of what's going on in that facility. So they know when things need to be cleaned, when paper or toner needs to be replaced, when the things like it's too cold happen. But that's just kind of standard improvements. The thing that they do that's really different is they also look at where and when people are sitting in what areas. So if you say, well, the conference rooms are already booked, they might look and say, yeah, but you have 3 conference rooms for 10 people each, and you only ever have 3 people in them. So why don't you reconfigure them, and then you'll have more space. So they're actually teaching companies about how their workers communicate, how that culture is evolving at the company. So it's a really, really big value add compared to just knowing that you need to replace the toner. So that's one new interface, changing things. Another one is the computer and real-world interface is often mediated by robots and other types of machines. There's a company called Nubotics that's working on textile robots, because most robots, if you happen to stumble, the wrong way into them, or they are programmed wrong, they can hurt you very badly. They're often set up in cages, and they're certainly, could even kill you. So that's why we don't generally walk around among industrial robots. Well, as you can see from this picture, with this nylon-based and pneumatic robot, the engineer here can actually hit it with a hammer. It won't hit him back, and if it did, it wouldn't hurt too bad. So you get a lot of the things that we expect from industrial robots, like precise control, lift strength, and so on, but you get something that works around humans. Now, this obviously is very dramatic as a robot, but you can think of a lot of other things, a lot of other mechanical or electromechanical interfaces where something like this might fit in, like automotive seating, for example, or like solar trackers, which is another company that's coming out of other labs, where they basically, rather than having motors and gears to position a solar panel to follow the sun during the day, they just have two cushions, and they sort of gently raise and lower the amount of air in each one so that the panel follows the sun. So they have a lot of really, really smart ways of approaching things. So this one platform of pneumatic, textile actuators, you could say, is really, really very versatile. So I mentioned the hoverboard, and I was just fronting here. There actually is a hoverboard. The company is Hendo Hover. We actually have the founders and inventors here, and maybe you could say hello, Greg and Jill. Two of the nicest people you'll ever met, so be really nice to them. And yes, had this amazing idea about how you could lift up buildings in the case of an earthquake or a flood. But also realized that buildings are not a short-term market opportunity. So came up instead with this idea of a hoverboard. And while they're exploring a lot of other applications for these hover engines, the hoverboard also is a Kickstarter project, very successful. And I had the great pleasure of getting to try one out last week. So I'm doing this instead of other props, and getting dressed up. I would have loved to have brought this here, but I couldn't. So let's start this demo. Okay, here we go. Oops, sorry. So can you guys click on that? There we go. This is the first time you'll notice, by the way, for me. What's really odd is you think it's just sort of going to be like maglev, it's sort of magnetic repulsion. It's propulsion. If you lean, it's going to take you somewhere. So it's not just your inertia, and it's a lot of fun. By the way, I was wearing the Lux Research t-shirt, so workers' comp, I could claim. So, all right. So this is getting totally ridiculous. This went on for a little while, and we're not going to make you watch the whole thing. But I didn't fall, and it was a hell of a lot of fun. And I highly recommend you get yourselves a hoverboard as soon as you can, which won't be too far from now. Now, in case you might suspect that this is just a defective product and there's no way this could be any fun at all, I actually have a video of somebody who knows what they're doing using it, and that's what we want to show now really quick. Can you guys click on that? So this is what a pro, or at least a semi-pro person looks like. It starts out a little fuzzy, but then you get to see how this goes. Right. Tricks, all right. Okay, so again, as a hoverboard, as a product, this I think certainly has a lot of promise. And now that Mattel and Hendo have met, we'll see if next year's LES will be a little bit more fun. A fourth example, so amorphous computing. So we think of computers as something that's very rigid. We've started to think about maybe printed electronics could help make these sort of thin, flexible films that would be able to do screens and stuff like that. Well, mesh materials It's basically, the idea is this. You've got aligned fiber composites, but rather than being fibers, those fibers are what are called smart dust or computer motes. So little chips that do things like store energy, do computation, show a display like they light up or they don't light up. They maybe have a sensor integrated into them. And in suspension, they're kind of, I don't know if you guys can see any of this. Oops. So there's this kind of viscous fluid, and you can basically, well, the idea is that you can computers are rebelling. Can you guys advance the slide one? AV guys, can you advance the slides? AV guys have all abandoned ship. There we go. Yeah, okay, so the idea is basically this. You've got these OLED motes suspended in this resin. There's an Arduino-based device. You maybe can see it says Hello World. Those are can you see it's kind of on? Okay. Basically says Hello World, and then as you pour some of these out, like into, I have a little tray here. So as you pour some of these out, then this coil looks at their addresses and sort of the X and Y stuff, what's happening, and then you get something that's kind of like a little display that'll blink and do some really basic stuff if you make it look really nice. So, all right, so that'll look really nice. So there you go. Okay, put that back. So this is obviously a pretty early stage thing. You got that? All right, so I don't actually know what this is good for. Does anybody here know what this is good for? Do you have an idea that it might be good for something? Do you have a suggestion? Somebody, please? This is harder than the machine question, I admit, but oh, come on. Nobody has an idea. Okay, you have a few more minutes to come up with an idea, and I'm going to ask you, and you're going to be on the hook. All right. So, but the whole idea that basically computers belong in a box is we're completely inverting that whole idea. Now, rather than us going into virtual reality, to having some avatar in a machine, now the machines are coming around into the real world, enveloping us. We wear them, we carry them with us, they're in our pockets, they're just basically going to be pervading our lives, the same with materials and other things, the other physical products that we are used to seeing are going to do. So this is what we mean by information meets matter. It's a two-way street. It's not just sensors everywhere. It's not just smart materials. It's both. So making the new machine, tomorrow's technology today. Now, you have sat through a lot, not just in my presentation, but all day. So we're going to go into, this is going to be the sort of pre-reception. Looking around here, what do you see? It's a normal kitchen. It happens to be my kitchen. Okay. Well, I didn't point out. So Back to the Future featured a Casio watch, a digital watch. And if you go into a kitchen 30 years later, you will see digital watches everywhere. There's the one on the coffee maker, which is never right because we unplug it all the time. There's the one on the stove that doesn't agree with the one on the microwave. There's the one on the iPad. There, if aliens landed on Earth, they would think that knowing the exact time was critical to our survival. It was like breathing. I don't know why we have clocks on everything just because we can have a clock on it. It's actually worse because we have too many clocks. See, I'll show the wrong time. So we have clock mania. Well, what if, fast forward another 30 years, there's something else that's on everything? Okay, what would that be? Like a sensor, for example. What sensors would be everywhere that would give us this smart home we sometimes talk about? Something that was one interface, the same way cassettes and desktop UI and all this other stuff is one interface. You got one interface that controls all this stuff: the microwave, the stove, the oven, whatever futuristic appliances we have in the future. Maybe your tablet computers, maybe your tablets, maybe the packages. So what would that interface be like? Any ideas? Candidates? A camera. That's a very good one. I like that. Any other? Voice. Camera and voice. Unanimity there? Any other ideas? We're going to have touch sensors on every single thing. Like you go up to the cabinet and you go like this and you write your name and it makes your favorite meal. Human detection. Yeah. So there are a lot of sensors and a lot of ways that we might configure this, but I actually agree with the camera idea. Two reasons. One, cameras are everywhere and getting even more everywhere. I think we have more cameras than digital clocks at this point. So billions of smartphone cameras, and they have two of them each. We have life loggers. Those are these devices that people have been wearing, starting in the late 90s, that would just record everything about their lives. And those are getting smaller and smaller, more and more powerful. They're getting connected to the cloud, so they're essentially always on. You have GoPros. If you go to go skiing, every single kid has a GoPro on all the time. If it's not on the GoPro, it didn't happen. Google Glass happened. It was kind of a flop, but I think they're going to give it another shot. And even police-mounted cameras. So we've had some very, very tragic events in the United States where people have been shot. Sometimes it's been on camera, sometimes it hasn't. But at least where there's been a camera, there's been some facts to go on, not just a cop's word versus the victim's word. So when Ferguson, which is one of the more bigger incidents, happened, President Obama said, okay, we're going to put 50,000 cameras on police officers and see what that does. And some of the early results from police wearing cameras is that both the police and the people they're talking to behave better. Something like 85% fewer violent incidents just because there's a camera being worn. So I think cameras are going to be a lot of places. They're already a lot of places. But what happens when they get smart, when they get some intelligence? So machine vision, AI, that's where I think we really start to make sense of a lot of things. And they can start to substitute for other types of sensors. So you could see appliances with no buttons. You just walk up to it and make a gesture, and that tells the appliance to cook your food or go up to level 10 or whatever. Cabinets with no handles. You just wave your hands and it opens up. Packages that order themselves. The camera could see when you throw away a certain package and put that on your shopping list. So there's a lot of things that could happen, but the technology for it exists today. So how do you go about looking at the future? How do you think what's going to happen? You can sit around and noodle about that and do spreadsheets for a long time, but there's a better way. So they say the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Kind of trite, but also happens to be true. So we've been trying something out. So predictive research. How do you do research that's about the future? We call this pre-search. So 4 different areas. We have a concept in interfaces, like the world as an interface, the one I just went through. Materials as computers, the one I showed you here. DNA as code. So we all know that DNA is code. If you work in biotech, you think of DNA as code, but it's actually legally treated as a composition of matter. In other words, if you had a memory stick that had a certain program on it and another one that had another, say, pictures on it, those would be different chemical entities in the legal sense. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. And people, we talk about all this cameras everywhere. Well, what's that going to do to, how we relate to each other, how we relate to the brands that we like, or how our bank and our insurance company will treat us? So with these types of questions, we've been doing this pre-search, and these are some of our themes. Now, I'm not going to make you wait through them. This is actually the beginning of the reception. So the pre-search plus questions plus receptions equals preception. These are just questions that you might enjoy discussing at the reception, or you might care to forget forever. But again, we did some research around this. So around the question, how will we interact with artificial intelligence and all these emerging sensor input and output technologies? So we didn't just go get a bunch of futurists and crazy science fiction writers and stuff like that to think about this. We actually brought together some of the people developing the technologies that are the components of this future system. We brought them together at Stanford and another workshop in Helsinki, and basically used paper prototyping to, as you can see some of the people doing here, to think about what those interfaces might look like. So Amazon, IBM, AT&T Foundry, Qualcomm, Oracle, Intel, Nokia, these are not just flaky, fly-by-night, super crazy startups or professors with a 30-year-from-now idea. These are people that actually have quarterly numbers that they have to hit. That's essentially what we're setting up for here in the reception, too. You've got a lot of really smart people that you could start to talk with about that specific question. Another one, the mesh materials. What happens when pervasive computing power becomes a material property? So looking at metamaterials, mesh networks, advanced composites, semiconductors, all those things coming together. We actually held that workshop at Xeroxparc. Xerox actually does work on those types of things. The ability to precisely place little droplets of ink is very similar to the ability to precisely place little droplets that have something smart inside them. And again, you can see oil companies, 3M, that made that tape that I talked about with those magnetic particles that was high performance, Dow, IBM again. These are very much corporate activities. And I also have, so I showed you this prototype. As I said, prototypes are a really good way to kind of envision the future. Has anybody had a good idea for how you might use something like this yet? No? All right, well, then I'm just going to keep it right here. Nobody wins the prize. TSA was very interested in that, by the way. So, genetic frontiers, as I mentioned, the idea of genetic code as a chemical doesn't really make sense to anybody in biotechnology, yet that's how it's treated for purposes of patents, for privacy, for all kinds of different stuff. So we have all these crazy rules that just don't make any sense. Kind of the same way that copyright and patents and things like that from the physical world didn't really make sense in software 20 years ago. But we have a whole generation of people that lived through that digital revolution and work at places like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the ACLU and basically know what happened with our rights and responsibilities through the digital revolution that we now think will start to apply to biotech as we start to have biohackers and easy access to sequencing and synthesis of DNA. So again, brought together a bunch of people. Tim O'Reilly, who's absolutely one of the godfathers of the digital revolution, was the host and one of the speakers. So that was really interesting. We're going to be taking that forward. And then one that's coming up, this is in May, so if you're interested in consumers, this would be a good one for you to attend. This is unfortunately not one that's organized and hosted only by us, so it is a paid conference. But May 4th and 5th in San Francisco at Insight Tech, Technology About Insights, Consumer Insights, we're going to be looking at this whole hierarchy from quantified self to smart homes to smart cities, all the data coming out of that. Who owns it? What are they going to do with it? What good will it be? Will it have any predictive value? Does it, help us change the way we market products or design products or packaging, retail stores, how they lay out? There's a lot that's going to come out of it. The same way a lot came out of sentiment analysis in Twitter and Facebook and other previous ways of technology. We just don't know what those things are. So again, bringing together the right people to talk about that and see where it goes. So you have now earned a summary. First, cassettes, containers, computers, and all these other things, these new interfaces remix entire industries. For the past 30 years, we've been making computers work like the real world. Now we're going to start to make the real world work like computers. And finally, if you want to find the next machine first, go to those interfaces. Go to the places where people from adjacent spaces meet and share a drink. Glasses are a good interface too. And I hope that you will continue to ask these questions as you go to the reception. I have time for some questions, but if you want to run out of here screaming and get something to drink, I won't be offended. Thank you very much for your attention.